Welcome to our week 2 training on multi-camera TV script formatting. This evening we're going to cover a few things. Welcome, Carrie. Our agenda for the evening is first we're going to do just a quick weekly check-in. We'll cover some announcements about the class. Then we'll talk about multi-camera script formatting. Then we'll discuss animation formatting, finding your episode dilemma, and pitching a spec. So to get us started, we'll start with our weekly check-in. Let's take a minute just to check in and let us know how you're doing. If anybody has any writing successes they'd like to share, or any challenges or things you're enjoying or have questions on about the class or the work we're doing, now's the time to ask. Okay, I'll assume that it means you all think the class is brilliant and you have absolutely no questions on anything. All right, so to get into our announcements, just a reminder this week, outlines or beat sheets on your spec episode of the web series No Good Deeds are due Friday before midnight to discussion board number 2. While I don't have everyone's grades completed for week 1's discussion, everybody did receive feedback on their episodes, and so I've make sure you consult discussion number 1 to see which springboard I approved you to proceed with, because that's the springboard idea that you're going to move on to discussion board 2 with. So in terms of the outlines or beat sheets, you're welcome to do either a beat sheet or an outline, whatever helps you best communicate your idea. But what we're looking for is kind of a scene-by-scene breakdown of what's, and scene-by-scene and act-by-act, what's going to happen in your episode. So we want to see the progression of the story. We want to see the elements of, the series doesn't follow a full hero's journey, but it does contain elements of a hero's journey. So we want to see reflected in your outline or your beat sheet the inciting incident or call to adventure. We want to see where Ernest comes in as mentor. We also want to see, what good deed is established for Roy to pursue. We want to see him actively pursue that goal, and we want to find out how it backfires. So just keep that in mind. Also remember that the series does use establishing shots, like we talked about last week. You'll find establishing shots in the approved scripts, so you can see what those look like if you don't remember. So you want to make sure you include your establishing shots in your outline or your beat sheet. You also want to make sure that you include the tag. So the tag typically is, for the web series, is usually one last, either it steps up to a second level, the backfire that happens for Roy, or it offers Ernest the chance to deliver a witty one-liner as a little insult to injury. So again, you can do this however you like. There's no set format for your outline or your beat sheet because it is such a small, short episode. But I want to see your episode fully thought out in either outline or beat sheet. And then your feedback posts for discussion number 2 and assignment 2 are both due on Sunday night before midnight. Assignment 2 is a research-based assignment. You're going to be doing location research for your thesis project. So, if you're not interested in working on TV, you don't have to continue developing your original series premise from last week. You're welcome to, but you don't have to. So if you would like to do assignment 2 for your thesis, you're welcome to do that activity on your thesis. But as it is research-based, make sure you've taken a look at it and you give yourself ample time to complete the work, because we do expect your references to be in ATA, and that this will be an ATA style paper. So that's all for that. There are genre-specific genre and format specific instructions on assignment 2. So let's say if you're doing a video game project, your instructions for assignment 2 will be different than those for students doing a TV series or students doing a film. So make sure you download the instructions that apply to the project you're going to be working on for assignment 2, whether it's your thesis or you're building on your original series premise from last week. Okay, so let's get into the fun stuff. Let's talk about multi-camera script formatting. And like I mentioned before everyone got here this evening, I'm going to leave the mics open just in case you have questions as we go along. But if it does get a little bit too noisy, or if you are in an environment where things start to get noisy on your end, as a courtesy to your classmates, if you could just mute your mic, that would be great. Otherwise, I will mute them on this end. But I'd like to leave them open. That way you can ask questions. So let's talk about multi-camera script formatting. First things first, as we talked about last week, when you're going into Final Draft, and you open a new document, it's going to automatically default to the last script you had open. So if I launch Final Draft on my computer, it just launched an untitled 1-hour TV drama template. As we know from last week, that's the single camera script template. Since we're learning multi-camera script template, which is exclusively for half-hour television, we want to make sure we open the correct template. So the way we do that is we go into File, New from Template, we select TV templates and the half-hour sitcom template. Just remember that half-hour sitcom is synonymous with multi-camera and 1 hour is for single camera. With multi-camera scripts, those are exclusively half-hour shows. However, single camera / 1 hour TV drama script templates are some sitcoms and they're all TV dramas. So if you're writing half hour, you do get the flexibility of choosing whether you're a multi-camera template or a single camera template. That's if you're writing an original pilot. However, if you're speccing a series, you want to make sure you choose the template that matches the series you're speccing. So if we're writing a Brooklyn Nine-Nine or a Modern Family, we're going to be writing a single camera half-hour script. So we would use the 1 hour TV drama template. But if we're writing 2.5 Men or a Big Bang Theory or something that's shot multi-camera, then we would want to use the half-hour sitcom / multi-camera template. Okay? And you know, if you're still confused of what multi-camera is versus single camera, make sure you take a look at lesson 3 because it explains the difference between the two. Keith wondered, what format would we use if you were writing a No Good Deeds episode? Now, since you've all seen the scripts, what do you think? Anybody have any ideas? Type it into the chat window if you do. Otherwise, I'm going to come back to this question after I finished showing you the multi-camera script template, and then hopefully you all will be able to figure it out yourselves, because this is kind of one of the learning objectives of the class. So what we're going to do, we've opened our half-hour sitcom, which is multi-camera script template. There's a few things we want to look at. We want to look at how to set up scene headings, cast lists, action lines, dialogues, parentheticals, and entrances and exits. So let's make sure we understand the differences between single camera and multi-camera. So in a multi-camera script template, I'm going to zoom this in a little bit for you guys. All see very well. Okay, so we just enlarged our script. The little flag, if you'll notice over here, it put a little flag. That's because I'm in revisions mode for some reason. So I want to turn this off, which I can do by clicking revisions mode or turning revisions mode off. If I select everything in my script, but I don't know why, actually that looks like a glitch, so ignore me. Okay, so first we're going to do scene headings. But actually, let's take a look first at all the different elements that are available to you in your multi-camera script template. If we were to look at a single camera TV script template, we would have all the same elements down to end of act. But we'd have like more of the teaser or the cold opening is different. So if we're starting, we're going to do our first element of our script here. It's going to be a cold opening. A cold opening and a teaser are effectively the same thing. However, cold open is only used, the term is only used in sitcoms. So if we're writing a sitcom script, we're going to write cold open rather than our teaser element here. So we've typed that in. We made sure our element is set to cold opening. We hit return. That takes us down to a scene heading. So I'm going to write my scene heading, and you can see that Final Draft is underlining it. Most sitcom multi-camera script templates do have underlined scene headings, so that's something you'll notice. But if you're speccing a multi-camera script series that does not have underlined scene headings, all you have to do to fix this in your template is just highlight the scene heading and then hit the command button plus the letter U, and that will remove your underline. Otherwise, you've got that like it is. Okay, so we're on the scene heading. We hit return. We can start typing our action lines. And notice I don't have my, you can't see my keyboard, but I'm going to tell you right now, I do not have my caps lock on. So on the line here, I've been typing and my caps lock is not on, but you'll notice my action lines are in all caps. In a multi-camera script, your action lines will be in all caps. If you're using the correct script template and you're correctly set to an action element, you won't have any control over this. So your Final Draft software will automatically use your action lines all caps. So it kind of takes some of the guessing out for you. When we're ready to write a character's dialogue, we'll hit return, go to the next line. If you hit tab, it automatically takes you to the character heading, or you can select that element when you're on the left button. Select character. Oops. So we hit return, and if I want to write a character element, there you go. So you can either hit tab or you can manually change the element. So if you'll notice here, my dialogue, I'm not manually double spacing. However, dialogue in a multi-camera script is double spaced. And again, this is another thing that Final Draft, if you're using the correct multi-camera script template, which is the half-hour sitcom template, it's automatically going to double space your dialogue. The reason for this is because it has a little bit to do with the fact how multi-camera scripts are shot. Single camera scripts, because the camera physically moves between each take, they light the scene, they shoot the action one direction, the director calls cut, they move the camera and get the other angles that are involved, and they shoot it all with one camera, separate setups. With multi-camera scripts, you have 2 or 3 cameras running at the same time, all filming the same action that happens in one big take. And you've got your director up in a booth, and he or she is switching between the various cameras, recording some of the episode live to tape. So the edits are made some of the edits, not all of them, but some of the edits are made straight through the camera and the switching booth. So that when they go into post-production, and the pieces are assembled, some of it's already pre-assembled based on what the director's done in the booth, okay? So the reason the dialogue is double-spaced is so that the director can make notes and then there's more white space in the episode itself for the director to make notes about where they're cutting from one camera to the other. Ultimately, it really, as the writer, the formatting, and it's not going to impact you other than the sense of, it will change your page count, because as you may have been told already, single camera scripts have a 1 page to 1 minute of screen time script to camera ratio. Okay. We've got some people having a hard time hearing, so I'm just going to mute everybody's mics. If you have a question or you want to ask a question, just make sure you either raise your hand. I don't know if you're allowed to do that in this, or if you can just type something in the chat window. I'll try to keep checking that periodically. Okay. So anyway, so the dialogue is double spaced. So now we know this. Parentheticals. Now, most of the time in multi-camera script templates, parentheticals are embedded within the dialogue and they're all caps. So, in a single camera script, we're going to write, that might be our parenthetical. Or, to cut out those ing words, we're going to write coughs. However, in most multi-camera scripts, these are embedded within the dialogue, and they're in all caps rather than entirely lowercase. So this is how they would appear within a multi-camera script. If you're speccing a series and they use traditional parentheticals, which are like we've used in our single camera scripts, you'll do them like this. But if you're writing an original sitcom pilot, you'll want to make sure you embed your parentheticals. Another element that exists in multi-camera scripts that you won't see in single camera television scripts is the cast list. So let's say I've got a character named Bob. So this scene has Julianne and Bob in it. If I hit return after my scene heading and I change the element to cast list, see what Final Draft just did here? It added the characters in this scene without me having to do anything. So you'll notice a lot of sitcom specs set this up. They tend to be a little bit more stage play like. So they'll let you know ahead of the scene which characters are in that scene. So this is the multi-camera version of that element. So if you'll notice, the left margin for this cast list is one space indented from the left margin of the action lines and the scene headings. As a reader, if I'm reading your spec and this margin is all the way to the left with the left margin of the scene heading or the action lines, I'll know just visually that your element is not properly set to cast list. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So let's say we continue on with this scene, but let's say Bob enters the scene. What do we need to do when Bob enters the scene? In multi-camera scripts, you will want to underline character entrances and exits. This is important because it is live to tape in a lot of ways. It helps call out the stage direction to the actors. So like a stage play, it does involve a little bit more technical information about actor entrances and exits. So same thing here if Bob leaves after. And Final Draft doesn't have the instinct to know that the entrances and exits need underlined. So this is one thing where Final Draft is not smart enough to catch it for you. So you will need to underline the entrances and exits yourself. And as we mentioned before, you highlight the text you want underlined, then hit Command to the left of either side of the space bar, plus the letter U, and that will underline for you. And you remove underlining the same way. Okay, let's go back here and see what's next. We covered scene headings, cast lists, action lines, dialogue, parentheticals, entrances, and exits. Does anybody have any questions? This is the basics. Just to make sure we're all clear, you want to make sure that every act, whether it's single camera or multi-camera, does have an act heading, And then when the act is over, we want to set this as an end of act element. So because it is the cold open, or if you're using a teaser, you still need to end that element. So you're going to choose the end of act element. And just like in a single camera script, TV script, when you're on an end of act element and you hit return, Final Draft is going to automatically take you to the top of the next page. So every time an act ends, there's a hard page break. So we automatically start the next act on the next page. But if you look, when I type in Act 1 for my new act, it starts halfway, like probably about a quarter page down the page. Again, this is just a way to give the director extra space to make notes. You can change it's automatically going to default you to an episode title element at the top of your sitcom. So what you want to do is you want to go into the document menu, select header and footer, and where it says episode title, you'll change it to the name of your script. Don't mess with page number. That automatically is default on Final Draft, and your pages do need to be numbered. So just don't mess with this element. Then you hit OK, and it automatically puts your script title right there. If you do want to add your script title to the first page of your script, remember you add show or episode title, and there's your element. So you can have your show and episode title, then your cold open. You've got your first scene for your cold open, your end of act element, and then act 1. And this works the same way. So we start our next scene. And then if you want to do that cast list, remember we just need to hit cast list. So that element is there, but because we haven't written any characters in this scene, it's not going to set up the characters yet. So I'm going to hit return. You may have to add that afterward because I can't return from there. Final Draft is a little buggy like that. So if I've said that I want a cast list element, but there's no cast yet in the scene, it's not going to let me include that element. So I'm going to hit return. It's going to ask me what element this should be. So I'll choose action, and then I'll write this. Then I can do that. And then when I'm finished writing the scene, I want to go back and add the cast list, I can do that now. And just remember that if you do want to change an element, you can either do that through this drop-down menu in the bottom of your Final Draft browser, or you can also do that from the Format, Change Element To option under the Format menu. Okay, so let's run a scenario. Let's say you wrote your sitcom spec entirely in single camera script format, but it's supposed to be multi-camera. So how do you change that? Does anybody remember from last week how we take our script from one template and put it in a different template without having to rewrite the whole thing? Okay, so what we'll do is we go up to Format, Elements, Apply a Template, and we scroll down to Half Hour Sitcom. Since we're going from the single camera 1 hour template, and then we hit Apply a Template, and we chose that. That's okay. So now, if you looked at the difference between what the script was before and what it is now, we can see that our action lines are in all caps. Our dialogue is double spaced. The only thing, if you make this change of a template, that it's not going to fix are parentheticals. So if I had any parentheticals in this before, as you can see right here, I would need to reformat those so that they fit the template. Okay? All right. So it's really easy to change a template. So if you've made it this far in the program and you think yours is a sitcom, multi-camera sitcom instead of a single camera sitcom, it's really easy to make that change. But let's take a look at something interesting, okay? I'm going to reopen this in the template it was in before. Okay, so let's look at this Brooklyn Nine-Nine spec, okay? We've got, if we look here, we can tell how many pages it is. It says 1 of 25. If I now go up to the Format menu, choose Elements, apply my sitcom template, and hit OK, you can look now, it's 33 pages. It's a big difference, big difference. So same amount of content, just a big difference in pages, which is why if you look at the CWMFA portfolio requirements, you can see that if you're writing a single camera sitcom, your template, your script should come in between 25 and 30 pages-ish. It says specifically in that template. However, if you're working on a multi-camera script, your script is going to be between 44 and 60 pages. So your script needs to be technically more pages, but it's the same amount of content. So just know that if you're working on a multi-camera template for your sitcom and you're turning in your pages every month, your pilot still needs to be probably close to 60 pages to be a full episode. Whereas if it was a single camera script, you maybe would only need 30. So it's kind of a big deal and just something to be aware of, especially if you're speccing a series. It's a half-hour show. How long does it need to be if you can't get your hands on any produced episodes of the script? Well, just remember, if it's multi-camera, which you can detect by just visually watching a show, then you'll want to make sure you use the multi-camera script template and that your script is between 50 and 60 pages long. So going back to Keith's question, which was which template do we need to use? I saw a couple people entered that we need to use a single camera template for our No Good Deeds episodes, which is absolutely correct. Because if we take a look at let's take a look at a No Good Deeds spec here. So here we've got one from last month. We notice our action lines are not in all caps. Our dialogue is not double-spaced. So this tells us we're using a single camera template. And we did have act headings, so that lets us know it's not a single camera film template, but it's the single camera TV template. So make sure when you start your episodes next week, we're not writing them till next week, when you start them next week, then you will be using the single camera template. So that is one of the learning objectives of the class. So I will be checking to make sure that your scripts are in single camera TV template. Okay, so let's go back to our presentation here. So what's different about animation scripts than single camera film or TV scripts? Well, animation scripts are not shot with multiple cameras because you're not shooting live in front of a studio audience. You're shooting animation cells or you're shooting computer graphics, which only requires a single camera because the drawings are physically changing. So only one camera is required. So you'll use a single camera template. If you're writing a feature animation, you'll use the feature camera film, you'll use a single camera film template, which is just the screenplay template in Final Draft. But if you're writing animated television, you'll use the single camera TV template, which is the 1-hour TV drama template. Now, when you're writing animation, things that are different are that you can call flashbacks out as either scene headings or shots. So whereas in a film script, let me open a film script for us. So let's take a look at, there we go. So let's say No Good Deeds, we're imagining No Good Deeds is an animation, just for the sake of this exercise. So we could either do a flashback here. We could do flashback, interior pub night. Flashbacks are done a couple of different ways. You can either do them like that. Some people put them like that, or some people put them at the end of the slug line. Follow whatever's in your Trottier book, because in the industry it's done a bunch of different ways. But for the sake of this program, use what it says in the Trottier book. However, for animation, you can either put it into your scene heading, or if it's in the middle of a scene and it's just a quick flash, you could write flashback to Rory took a sip of his beer. And then once the flashback is over, you either write back to scene or end flashback. So in animation, it can be either one of those techniques. You can either put it in the slug line, or it can actually appear as an action element. Also, character sounds like laughing should be spelled out within the dialogue. So, in film, if you have a character who laughs during a scene, you'll put it as a parenthetical. So we've got our, excuse me, still fighting a little bit of this cold. So if you've got a character who, if Ernest laughs here, in an animated, in a regular film or TV script, if it's single camera, we would write the parenthetical like that. However, in an animated script, you'd phonetically write out the sound of the laugh and include that as part of the dialogue. So maybe he says, wah ha 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 ha. So you could write it like that. It would be part of the dialogue. And this is really similar to, it's very similar to comics in a way, because in comics, you'll also write out the phonetic spelling of the sounds, because in comics, you can't physically hear a sound. So if a character's laughing or cackling or sobbing, you'd need to write that as a dialogue for your comic so that it appears as text. In an animated script, you're writing it as part of the dialogue because the actor goes into a booth and they need to have a little bit more direction in the script on how they're going to laugh. So this is really the only time the animation scripts and comics when you get to spell out sounds. Otherwise, you can't tell the character to say ha ha ha. You would have to write out laughs. But in animation, you can do that different. And finally, in animation, the writer is usually given the freedom to call some shots and camera angles. In TV and film scripts, it's usually completely discouraged for the writer to call shots and camera angles. You want to avoid it in your single camera and multi-camera scripts for film and television. But in animation, a little bit more of that is okay because the director is given a little bit more freedom to call some of the shots. So let's say that, this is, again, an animation script. We could write low angle on Roy. He takes a sip of his beer. Or we could write Dolly in on Rory takes a sip of beer. The thing about camera angles, though, is make sure you know what they are, what they mean, and how to use them before you add them to your script. I've seen so many scripts from writers that misuse dollies or pans or tilts. A tilt is an up and down movement, like you're looking up and then looking down with your head. So that's that movement. A pan is as if you were taking your head left to right. So try not to confuse those two. And other things like low angle or high angle, different shots. If you're going to use them, like I said, make sure you've researched them and you know what they are and that you have a valid reason for calling them out in your script. Most of the time, the writer doesn't really have any reason to do that. but in animation, it is a little bit more acceptable for the writer to call some of the shots. We covered last week using the index card view of Final Draft. But let's talk about Format Assistant. I think some of you have probably been introduced to it already, but it's definitely something you want to make sure that you run before you submit a script to a producer or an agent. Don't let your script go out the door without having run Format Assistant. Now that's under the Tools menu, Format Assistant. And what that's going to do is it's going to scan your script for common errors. Some of the things that I saw in some of your thesis drafts that got submitted this week were, you'd have two bumps of dialogue from the same character in a row without separation with a line of action. Normally what you'd do is you'd omit this second character heading and put all the dialogue together. But let's say you didn't do that and you had them like this in your script, or you've added some extra spacing, or there's an extra line between things. If you run Format Assistant, it's going to help spot these. So Final Draft flagged this. It says characters should not speak twice in a row without a different element separating the dialogue. So we can, it doesn't offer us the option to fix that because you'll have to fix that manually. So like I said, you can just delete this and move this dialogue up to this line. Then if we hit next, it'll continue. It says elements should not start with spaces. So what that'll tell us is we added an extra blank space at the beginning of this line. So we just have to delete that. And if we hit next again, it's going to find a blank script element. So elements should not be blank. And that just means that we have a line here that's formatted as something, but there's nothing on that line. So you want to delete that. And when possible, Final Draft will offer to fix that error for you. But you just have to make sure that you're double checking and that it's doing what you want. Another tool when you're going to edit your scripts are the cast and location lists. I think these are fabulous editing tools, and where you'll find them is under the Tools menu under Reports. So let's go to Location Report. What this is going to do is it's going to generate a list of all the locations that are used in our script. And the way we can use this is, so it's grouping all instances of pub under one scene heading, under one listing. So all of our interiors are here. This is an establishing shot, so it separated it out. But let's say if we had an interior and an exterior at Roy's apartment, both interior and exterior would be listed under here. So we can make sure that if they both appeared there, we know that our headings are all formatted properly. So this is just a way of double checking your scene headings at a glance. Let's actually take a look at a different script just to kind of see how it'll group them. Let's see. I think this one has. Okay, so we're going to run a location report on this one. No, these all separated them out. So, but anyway, what Final Draft will do is it makes you a list like that. So at a glance, you can double check that all your spacing between your scene elements and your scene heading are correct, so that you've got ample spacing to either side of the dash that separates location from time of day. Carrie asked, would location and cast list be in the final version of the script? They're basically tools that aren't really ever used by anybody besides the production team. So if I greenlit your episode of No Good Deed, the film students in the film department are going to use tools like location report, cast report, and character report to generate tools that help in production. So the location report, if I'm the location scout or I'm the production manager, I'm going to say, okay, I need to lock all these locations I've got 2 scenes that are shot inside the pub. This is the page number they're on. So I need to lock all of these locations. And so this title card got set as a scene heading. So that's actually something valuable here. If this element of the title card was properly formatted as an action element, which it should have been, or as a shot even, it would not appear in the location report. But being that it's in the location report, that tells us that this element got formatted as a slug line. So if we go back into the script here, and we find that, we click on this, yep, you can see right here, it's marked as a scene heading. So that element is improperly formatted. So what we would want to do is change it to an action element. So there we go. If you run a cast list, it'll do the same thing with the characters in the script. So it's going to give me a list of all the characters in my script: Ernest, Rose, and Roy. It tells me all this information, which would be used by the production team. But as a writer, I can use this information to say, did I spell Ernest's name the same way every time? Because if I'd added an A to one spelling of his name, spelling it E-A-R-N-E-S-T, then his name would appear with both spellings in this cast list, which would be my flag that I'd need to go back through and clean up the misspelling of his name in the one spot. So going back to Carrie's question, the cast list and the location list, they can be generated from your final script, but you don't actually have to run those and submit them with your script. Okay, so that's all we're going to cover as far as formatting for the evening and for our multi-camera scripts. So I'm going to take a little breather right here. I'm going to open up the mics just for a minute. So if anybody has any questions about formatting your multi-camera script or using Format Assistant or the cast the location list, now's the time to ask. All right, so we'll move on then. Okay, let's talk about some TV writing techniques. This one, we're going to talk about the episode dilemma. And a dilemma is, it's just the central question. It embodies the character's goal, but it's what the episode boils down to be about. It involves characters' wants and needs, or whatever question is posed by the episode. So the way you can find your episode dilemma is to first ask yourself, what inciting incident in each plot line sets the goal for the characters? So in a typical episode of No Good Deeds, it might be, let's examine episode number 4. Roy encounters April, the little girl with the bicycle, and she tells him that she has a broken bike and she needs the training wheels off of her bike. And so that sets the goal for Roy of helping her ride her bike, because he's going to help her take the wheels off so that she can ride it. So the episode dilemma becomes about, can Roy help April ride her bike? So that's the dilemma of the episode. So you want to ask yourself as well, have your characters begun to pursue the goal by the end of Act 1? Are we at that moment where the characters are committed to their journey, or right about at that point? In longer form television, you want to make sure that the characters get to that point by the end of Act 1. This is really important because otherwise your show is going to meander and your audience isn't really going to understand what the episode is about. It might be something that they come to fully understand and be able to articulate later into the episode, But as the writer, you need to make sure your characters are on their journey, pursuing the dilemma, trying to solve the answer to whatever question you're posing um, by the end of Act 1, or at least getting that foot in the door so that by Act 2 we get them going on their goal. Then you want to ask yourself, are they actively pursuing that goal throughout the story? Um, you know, we want to make sure that our stories are moving forward, that the characters have a purpose to what they're doing. Um, and if a character's not pursuing their goal in a scene, you have to ask yourself what the function of that scene is. You know, is it just because it's funny? Are you adding the scene because it's advancing a different storyline? If you're involving multiple characters, you have to be thinking about what everybody wants, where they are emotionally, and what they would be physically doing in that scene. Is it important that they're in that scene? And is that scene doing something to progress the narrative? You also want to ask yourself, excuse me, sorry, what are the emotional stakes and what's the conflict? So if you've got an episode of Grey's Anatomy where Meredith's goal is to save somebody, how much more dynamic is her saving this character if it's somebody she emotionally connects to, or if there's no conflict? You want to think about, versus just helping a patient. The patient comes to her, she writes them a script, says, here, I've solved your problem, you're done. Or does her surgery, all's hunky-dory. Kind of boring. She still had a goal and she pursued it, but nothing was really at stake. But how does it add a more robust storyline if that particular patient, um, you know, is the sole caregiver to 12 adopted children? Kind of makes it a little bit more important to more people if that character lives. So that adds some emotional stakes. If Meredith can't save this person, then 12 children will be orphans. What's the conflict? Is the surgery complicated? Or is it just a routine surgery? Maybe you've got this guy with 12 children for whom he's the sole caregiver, and he's got to have surgery. But if it's, he's having some hemorrhoids removed, not a whole lot of conflict there, versus if it's an invasive heart surgery. That adds extra conflict. Or, if he's a patient who, because of his religious beliefs, can't have blood transfusion. That makes it a lot more conflicting, and it makes the episode more dynamic and interesting. So think about what's going to engage us through emotional stakes and conflict. Then ask yourself, what will happen if the characters don't achieve their goal? So you're writing an episode of a show with romantic tension between these two characters. And we know one's goal is to ask the other one out on a date. So what happens if they don't ask them out on the date? Does life just go back to normal? That's kind of boring. How can we add some sort of consequence? How can we increase that as the episode goes on? If it doesn't impact that character's life, if there are no emotional stakes, if there's no conflict, you have to then think about, will your audience actually care if that person succeeds at their goal? So try to add all of those elements, the emotional stakes, the conflict. It doesn't have to be melodramatic by adding emotional stakes and conflicts, but think about the consequence. If our character wants to ask this girl out on a date, how can we make that more robust and have there be something that happens if they don't achieve their goal? Obviously emotionally, the emotional stakes might be, this this love interest might be the only person who understands our protagonist's backstory. So that could be an emotional stake. Something, you know, he our protagonist wants to be with someone who knows his secret. Okay, let's say we're writing a superhero and he's fallen in love. If he's falling in love, the emotional stake is that he may be falling in love with the only person who knows his secret, his real identity. The conflict might be maybe there's someone else interested in the love interest. So, or maybe the conflict is our superhero is gone all the time and can't say why, or the superhero is being torn between the duties of caring for the whole world versus being able to advance his relationship with this person he's in love with. And what will happen if they don't achieve their goal? Will the girl get snatched up? Is she by somebody else? Is she going to break up with him, or might she be moving away? Let there be some sort of consequence, or uh, let us see a future where the character doesn't achieve their goal. Because we have to know why we care. We have to know why that character cares, and as a result, why we should care. So in every scene, ask yourself if the episode dilemma is reflected in the character's actions. Ask yourself, are the stakes escalating? So this might be, initially they want to ask, or maybe we'll go back to our Grey's Anatomy example. So starts out, this guy's going in for a routine surgery. Not a problem. It's serious, but not a big problem. But when they run all his pre-op tests to make sure he's ready for surgery, maybe they find something bigger is going on. So that makes it an even more dangerous surgery. And then maybe one of his children doesn't want him to have the surgery, or maybe he has no insurance money and this is going to bankrupt his entire family. If you can escalate the stakes by adding different complications that heighten the seriousness of what's going on, that's really going to make a dynamic episode. Plus, it gives you something different to explore about the dilemma in each act. And it'll also help keep the story moving forward. Forward story progression is really important. If your episode never increases the stakes, and it's just he asks her out, she says no. He asks her out, she says no. He asks her out, she says no. It's boring, it's repetitive. He asks her out, she says no. Well, then, the next time he asks her out, he asks her to do something more serious. He says, will you go to the prom with me? She says no. Maybe he then spends a lot of money renting a tuxedo and buying flowers and does all these elaborate things. It makes sure it's advancing the story, things are getting more serious, and that the further the character gets into their journey, whether it's like physical plot wise or emotionally, it needs to raise the stakes and add tension. And finally, let's talk about act outs. Does everybody know what an act out is? If you do, type it into the chat window. See if you're all paying attention. Yes, Robert said it's the last thing before the commercial. Exactly. An act out is right before the commercial. It's the last beat before that act ends, as Keith said. It's that moment that compels us to come back after the commercial break. These are really important. You're going to find shows that have kind of blah act outs. So there's always exceptions to the rules, but when you're watching television, next time you watch an episode of a show, look at what the act breaks are. Even if you have to rewind, or if you can rewind, or just consciously think about what that last scene was before the commercial break. Did it end on a question? Or did it end on a new piece of information that changes the game? Did it end on something that escalates the stakes or adds a new piece of conflict? It's really important that that moment has something interesting and compelling that pulls us back after the act break, because we're going to go to commercial. If we're not watching on Netflix and we're watching broadcast television, or even if we are watching Netflix, those beats keep us invested in the episode and make us come back, and not change the channel to see what else is on. So they're very important. So as you're crafting your episode, think about that moment and how it can either end on a question, add on a new piece of information. If it's a mystery, is it a reveal of a new piece of information in the case, or we find out the person we thought it isn't the person we thought it was, or if you can escalate the stakes or advance the plot in a compelling way that makes us want to come back after the break. Okay, so finally, let's talk about pitching. Pitching is, it can be the unfortunate thing that has to accompany selling our work. As writers, sometimes we're not the best at pitching. And it's just because we stay on paper and stay in our story so much that sometimes it's hard to turn on the presentation skills and deliver an interesting, compelling pitch. But pitching is a huge part of the process, especially if you're working in television. So whether you're sitting in a story room with all the other writing staff and you're pitching your episode ideas, like if you're pitching your springboards, or whether you just miraculously happen to be in the elevator at the same time as Shonda Rhimes and you have 15 seconds to tell her your story. It's important to know how to pitch. And so you want to practice this. As you're working on your film and TV scripts and your comics and your games, you want to practice your pitch on people. You want to make sure it's not just on a piece of paper and that you're reading from it. If you went to a pitch fest or something, or you get invited to come in and pitch to a producer or a manager, an agent, you don't ever, ever, ever want to have a piece of paper in front of you and be looking at it and not making eye contact. So what you want to do is try to engage visually as much as possible with the person that you're pitching to. So sometimes, if it's a longer pitch, you might need to jot a couple of notes just to remember like your 5 main beats on a card that you can hold in your hand. And if you get lost or confused, you can look at it and regain your train of thought and start to talk to people. But you want to make sure we see your eyes and that you're engaging with the person you're talking to. But in a pitch, it's important also to talk about how you connect to the story. Because I could pitch you Die Hard. It's a brilliant story. But if I don't seem like I am the best person to tell that story, or I have a unique angle on telling that story, it's going to be twice as hard for me to sell that pitch as it would be for somebody else who either has a connection to the story somehow because something, it doesn't have to be literal. Like Die Hard, I'm the best person to tell Die Hard because it happened to me. I was stuck in Nakatomi Plaza with my wife. But you want to talk about how you can connect to the story. So if, let's say I'm writing a story about, okay, I've got an example. It doesn't have to be your personal story, but we should see you reflected in it. So I'm gonna give you a couple of example pitches from some of my projects, and I'm just gonna kind of go off the cuff here and tell you my stories so that you can kind of see what a pitch might be like and how you can connect to your personal story. So I'm going to talk to you about my zombie comedy called Digging Doug. And so a few years ago, I had this idea for a zombie comedy, but it was about a vegetarian zombie, and I thought that was such a cool angle. So I was practicing my pitch on my sister, and as I'm telling her the story, she starts to cry. And it wasn't because she thought it was funny. She was genuinely very sad, and I asked her what was wrong, and she said that a friend of hers had passed away, and she'd been rereading some of his emails, and he said one thing he wanted to do before he died was star in a zombie film. Well, my sister, understanding my sense of comedy, responded so much better when I said, well, we could go dig him up to star in mine. And that ended up becoming the plot of what my film is, Digging Doug. It's a story of two friends who dig up the corpse of their dead best friend in order to fulfill his unrealized dream of starring in a zombie film. So I could pitch you Digging Doug without telling you the little story of, you know, how I came up with the idea. But because I gave you that personal connection, um, it sells you a little bit as a listener on how I'm connected to that story and why I'm uniquely qualified to tell that story. You know, because part of it I can relate to, the characters, you know, are inspired by this, that, or the other thing. Um, or it might be something like, uh, I'll pitch you another idea. Uh, a few years ago, my younger sister made the comment to me that in her entire life, I'm the only person who's looked exactly the same throughout her whole life. She's 14 years younger than me, so you know, from the time she was a child to now at 23, um, she told me I'm the only person who's looked exactly the same for her whole life, which I thought was really interesting, and made me start thinking, what if you had someone like that in your life who you realized wasn't just aging well, but was actually a time traveler. And so that's where I came up with my idea for um, Brushback, which is the story of a son who grows up thinking his dad's an absentee father, only to find out that his dad is a time traveler who used his last 2 weeks of life to visit key points in his son's life as his son grew up. So, you know, I can't relate to being a guy or, you know, having a dad who's a time traveler, but I can connect to that story because of my sister, you know, making the comment that I've looked the same for her whole life. So the more you can do to kind of find a way to segue into your story with a personal connection, um, all the better. You know, if you're writing an animated series about, you know, kids in a daycare and you have experience working as an elementary school teacher, perfect. Tell us. Make sure we understand that you know the voices of little kids. Or you have a funny anecdote. Maybe you're writing a Grey's Anatomy episode and you're not a doctor. Well, maybe a friend of yours suffered from an interesting disorder that you could explore in your episode of Grey's Anatomy. So pitching can be really fun. You know, you want to try to engage as much as possible. And I encourage all of you to go out and practice pitching your thesis to people. Start with your family or people that aren't going to judge you if you bumble it a little bit. But then start trying to talk to strangers and, you know, gauging people's interests and, you know, figuring out, you know, do they connect to certain parts of your pitch, or seeing where in your pitch you lose them. That might be where you need to articulate the story a little bit better. So I encourage you all to try that. And if you ever need an ear, feel free to give me a call and you can practice your pitch on me. Um, if you are just randomly pitching to a producer, I would definitely say have your mini pitch and your longer pitch. So as a mini pitch, you want to have 30 seconds to maybe a minute of pitching your idea. And if they want to hear more, they'll ask, and then you can tell them the longer version of your pitch. But start out with something small and digestible so that you can hook them and they will ask more. Don't always pose a lot of questions, but you want to, you know, maybe give them your log line or give them, you know, 3 to 5 sentences or, you know, a paragraph that sums up what your story is about and why it's interesting, so that they'll ask more questions about your story. And that is all I have for you this evening. I'm going to make the mics live again. So if anybody has any questions, you can ask me now. Otherwise, I'll let you get going for the evening, but I appreciate everyone being here. And that's all I have for you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great night.
Yeah, you too.